Hi. Hi. So let's, just to get everything started and start the conversation, I'd like everybody to stand up, if we can, for a second. All right. Okay. So if you are currently working in data science, you're already working in data science, sit down. Okay, all right. If you're currently looking for a position in data science, sit down. Oh, is it like everybody? No? Okay. Cool. Wow. All right. Cool. If you're working in a related field, sit down. So like software engineering or anything like that. And okay, and everybody else, I guess. Sorry. What? How did I miss you in terms of category? What?
I mean, I'm in a field that processes a reasonable amount of data.
Yeah.
I see it is exploding.
Okay.
And I see this new tool as kind of a necessary tool.
Right on. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Right on. Okay, so Mirda gave me a great introduction. Thank you so much. So I'm from Lightbend here, and I think the first question that you might ask yourself about, somebody from Lightbend coming to talk to a group of folks who are really talking about data science is, like, why does Lightbend care? Like, why does Lightbend really care about data science? Now, if you're not familiar with Lightbend, we're the company behind Scala. So we created the Scala language and we maintain it. We are the company behind Akka and the Play framework. We're contributors to Spark, which obviously plays into data science. And a lot of the big data technologies that you see today are built on our technology. So, Kafka and Flink and Spark, these are all built on Lightbend tech. But that's not why. That's not why we really care about data science. I don't think that's the core reason. And what I want to do today is walk you through that, and if you'll pardon the sort of the walk through nostalgia a little bit, I'd like to walk you guys through why we care and how we came to really care about data science. So software, and I think everybody can build their own models for this. There's 1,000 of them out there, but this is mine, so I'm going to tell you about it. So software has gone through, I think, 3 major sort of phases or revolutions, really driven by the hardware. And I think we're in the middle, or we're at the beginning of a 4th. And I think this is really, really kind of an interesting time to be in software and working with software. So the first revolution, the first sort of evolution of software based on the hardware, was sort of this early sort of monolithic, systems, right? So, in the 1950s, I think, ADP was one of the first companies to really use computers for business purposes. They started processing payroll on a giant mainframe. At the time, these things are room-sized machines. And that kind of software development was really around this sort of single task, single computer, what you would call sort of a time-sharing system, right? I'd run my program and then, I'd stop and then somebody else gets their turn to run their program. Very sort of manual processing. And so this is where we sort of started that first revolution of software. And it was a pretty exciting time. From there, we went into sort of the second revolution of software, and I've got a picture of a race car up here because it really was about this race for speed. So the first microprocessor came out in the 70s, and that kicked off this sort of revolution, and it's the revolution that made Bill Gates and Michael Dell all this money. And it's essentially this idea that we were racing for single-threaded performance, right? We were running towards a processor that really drove one thread as fast as it possibly could. And at the time, we built applications to really maximize the usage of that one thread. We had Microsoft Word on Windows 98, and we're like, this is a great application, and we can do amazing things with it. We can bold text, and we can underline text, and even italicize it. It's like really awesome. And that was that sort of that evolution, that revolution. What was happening at the time was there was almost no bandwidth, right? Like we had very little connectivity of these computers. Networking stacks on these operating systems were a little bit of an afterthought. They were added on after the fact, and And as a result, everything was centralized onto these distributed pieces of silicon, spread around the world. In a very distributed sort of environment, very, sort of isolated sets of computers. And we built software as a result that sort of, went for, and followed that scheme. Our software as well was sort of, multitasking, right? So we had sort of, a thread that would be released, and then we would, pull it back to another task. And when I was in that window working on Microsoft Word, it was super great. When I had to switch to a different window, it was, not so great. And that's sort of how that system worked. And, that still exists today to an extent. And the third revolution that I think was sort of massive was that we moved towards more and more bandwidth. And we moved to this world where we, in the year 2000, early 90s, ended up with what we called application service providers, which were a completely failing business model. So we renamed it SaaS and then turned it into the cloud. And that works great, same model. So we moved into software as a service, and we moved into this model where we started to have more and more bandwidth. It's still fairly isolated, still fairly connected to where my computer was. I had bandwidth, starting to get into mobile devices and things like that, but it wasn't like bandwidth was ubiquitous. Processing was still at the edge, and the kind of software we were building then for the cloud, if you will, or the early cloud, was sort of these monolithic applications that really, what they did mainly was they allowed you to take data and put it into a database online, and then allow other people to view it or change it as well. And this was like huge. Like this is like Salesforce.com style stuff, right? I could put data in and you guys could take it out. This was a massive innovation in software. So the kinds of applications we're building at that point, this is the rise of Java EE, this is the rise of Spring, all of these kinds of systems that allowed you to put data into a database and get it back out again, essentially. 99% of applications were built that way. And our desktops and things like that were becoming more and more thin client, right? I could do things over the web and all these kinds of things, and it was really, really exciting. So that's sort of the third, and I would say, my personal timeline would put that ending somewhere around 2013, 2014 type of time frame. Where we're going now, I think is really, really cool. And it's into this world of ubiquitous networking. So I was sitting on the train over here. I took the train into Islington Station. And on that long train ride from, I think, Bloor-Young to Islington, there's like no connectivity, right? And I'm sitting there with my phone and I'm like, this thing's broken. I can't do anything at all without connectivity. Everything that I do with all of my devices is only online. It's all like ubiquitous connectivity. Everything is connected all the time. If it's not connected, it's broken. And this is kind of where our world is going now. We've got massive amounts of connectivity, and it's really, I think, being driven by that availability of bandwidth that we have today. So we've got massive bandwidth, always on, always connected, and that's leading to this huge proliferation of devices. So we're getting IoT devices everywhere. We've got connected cars. We've got connected phones. We've got connected watches. We've got connected earbuds now. We've got thousands and thousands of industrial applications for IoT, and it's driving just a massive increase in data. So you can see on this chart here that this is from Inside Big Data, but these guys are predicting over this next half decade that we're halfway through already, a massive increase in the amount of data that we create every year. And that's driving a completely different way of thinking about software, and building applications. And this is what I'm really here to talk to you guys about today. So we're seeing massive centralization, and we're seeing like really, really neat applications coming out of this. So I gave you the Microsoft Word example before, right, with amazing features like bold, right, and italics. Now we've got, the Google Docs world, right? So we're into this world where we've got these applications that, okay, I can still bold and I can still italicize, which is amazing. But even more amazing is I can watch somebody halfway around the world edit my document in real time. right? So now I can, locate that person. We can work together on the same document. All of that's, going to be centralized in terms of its storage, centralized in the way that it works together. These are massively difficult problems to actually create applications for. They're really, really challenging, and they're, driven by this sort of connectivity everywhere that's going on. So let me bring it back, sort of full circle here. Why does Lightbend care about data science? So Lightbend is the company behind what we call reactive, right? So reactive is a terminology that, for the purposes of online systems, not for the purposes of functional programming, we've sort of taken and brought to the market. And we've got something called the Reactive Manifesto out there. And really all that says is there's a certain way to build applications so that they are elastically scalable, resilient, responsive, right? And all of that drives back to being message-driven, and I won't dive too deeply into the details. But essentially, it's all about building applications for this fourth revolution of software. It's about building applications that are able to work in a totally centralized and cloud-based world in a way that drives these kinds of values that we've been talking about for people to use, essentially. And so I've got my picture up here. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but with all of this data sort of flowing into the system and with all of this centralization, what we believe is that this concept of a data lake or static data is going to turn into, if you actually want to drive value out of this stuff, is going to turn into being able to access streaming data, right? So we're turning the lake into a stream. But so if you think about it, right, so with all of the data that's coming in and all of the connectivity that's out there, if you actually want to be able to remain competitive, if you want to be able to drive forward new capabilities and have people use this stuff that you create, the concept of being able to statically build predictive analytics models and all of that stuff, super powerful, very useful, but where the world is going to go is towards real-time contextual applications that can take massive streams of data and operate on those streams of data in real time. And that's what we believe, and that's what we're sort of building around. So Lightbend has created something called the Fast Data Platform. Highly recommend you check it out if you haven't heard of it before. It's essentially a platform for building data science into streaming applications, and taking advantage of all the innovation that I've been talking about here. So this is my preamble. This is just the start. So let's get into it. So what does this actually mean? Like at the end of the day for organizations and companies. And I don't know if you guys have seen this cartoon before. I saw this and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. In organizations today who want to take advantage of this new world, this revolution that's happening, always-on connectivity, streaming data, contextual applications, or applications that can make decisions in real time. For a new startup to take advantage of that stuff, it's pretty easy. And I was in talking to a startup yesterday, and we were talking about the change in the world and stuff like that. And they were like, we get it. We download Kafka, we download Spark, and we can build streaming applications. We're happy. It's no problem. But for large organizations, that story is really different, right? And it actually requires a lot of institutional change to be able to take advantage of this kind of changing world and this next revolution in software. So I love this cartoon. It sort of talks about that really well. So let me, so when you look at those two, you sort of look at it and say, okay, well, startup world, easy, legacy world, hard, difficult to do the change. But why is that change actually necessary for an organization to take advantage of? Ooh, what happened there? Sorry. All right. So why does it matter for organizations? I love this sort of article here. It's from the Capital Group. These guys have estimated that by 2027, 75% of the S&P 500 will be replaced. So over the next, sort of decade, next 10 years, there will be, only a quarter of the companies that are currently in the S&P 500 will still be in the S&P 500, right? So there's a massive amount of churn happening, and my, evaluation of this is that we are going through this revolution, and the companies that can't keep up, that can't disrupt themselves, can't, get this change under control, and harness it and be able to actually make use of all of this technology and this centralization of data and contextual applications are the ones that are going to churn out. And you can kind of see this. This is actually the recent ones that have entered or exited the index for the S&P 500. You've got companies that you expect coming in, Google, Apple, Facebook, and then all kinds of companies that just haven't really made the leap. They haven't made it going out the other side. And of course, everybody knows that the challenges that newspapers have had with new technology. The New York Times has exited the market, but there's a series of them that are just really haven't made the leap. So essentially, it's one of these things where if you can't get on the train's going to run you down, right? As an organization, if you can't take advantage of the new technologies, if you can't continually be reinventing yourself in a time of massive revolution and change in the software industry, then you may as well just close up shop. Now that's maybe a little extreme, but it's really, really essential to be able to actually take advantage of this stuff and be able to reinvent yourself as an organization as you go. So that's why it matters to companies. That's why it matters to organizations and to the industry, right? It's sort of innovate or die, and I think now more than ever before, right? The new capabilities and the new capacities for being able to use data, if you're not taking advantage of those and you're not taking advantage of those in a way that allows you to build competitive offerings to market, that's real time, that's contextual and stream and all of these kinds of things, you're just not going to make it anymore because somebody else will, right? Somebody else will disrupt you. But what does it mean to you, right? As a a person out there looking for a position right now, or working inside an organization, what does that mean to you? Yeah, organizations are screwed if they don't catch up and change and disrupt. But what about everybody in this room, right? So my premise is that it's just as true for people as it is for organizations. If you guys can't, throughout your careers, throughout everything that you do, continually change, learn, grow, and keep up with this stuff, stay on the forefront of technology, you guys are going to be just as screwed out there. And I think that the fact that everybody is here and doing this learning, I don't think I'm going to get a lot of disagreement, right? Everybody's already here and engaging in this. This is what we all know to be true in this industry. It's sort of keep up or fall out. I've got an interesting story. There's a company out of Ottawa, where I'm from, that is called Nortel. So you guys might have heard of it. They were a little company, 70,000 employees in worldwide at one point, and they had within their company, they'd created a programming language and an application framework. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was an application framework that they'd created. And they had people who worked, pretty much their entire career with this environment, this framework. And I don't know if you guys heard the news. Nortel kind of fell on some hard times. It wasn't a great story, a little bit of a failure at the end of the day, after a long time of success. And this group that was working with this technology was laid off. And so there were people there who had worked 15, 20, 25 years in their careers with this one technology, and that's all they really knew. And they were put back out into the market with 5, 10 years left in their careers that they had to work and wanted to work before they retired. And we're suddenly faced with, I am an absolute expert. I've defined my value around a set of skills that doesn't exist anywhere anymore, right? And it's a really tough situation. And it's something that I think as people in this industry, we have to be aware of, right? It is possible, even in a fast-moving industry like software, to be, or data science, or any of these kinds of things that are moving quickly, it is possible to get into a rut. It's possible to get into an environment where I'm not really learning outside of the core of what I'm already doing, right? And that's a risk. It's a real risk for people. And I've also found in my own career that the people who are going to drive the most value within an organization are those who are continuously learning. They're always looking beyond what the lines that they're already in are and out to more knowledge gathering and learning within their career and their industry. So I think this is really, really important. And so to tie these kinds of things together, choosing a company, right, or choosing an organization, or helping an organization to adopt these kinds of things, that where you're in an environment where you can continually learn, where you can continually grow, is really, really important. And so what I want to do today is I want to give everybody in the room some tools to try to look at different companies that are out there and identify what it's going to be like working for them, and how you're going to be able to grow and align your interest in evolving your career, evolving your learning with their goals and outcomes. So that's what I really want to do. All of this previous stuff, that's all just preamble. This is the meat. This is where it is. Everybody paying attention? Yeah? A little bit, kind of? Nobody's asleep yet? Okay. All right. So.
I have a microphone.
Oh, a microphone.
Let's see how it sounds.
Oh my goodness. Can everybody? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
You don't have to use it if you don't want to.
If I can avoid it, if that's okay,
Avoid it.
that would be great. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, I'll try to project more as we go. So I've been working with companies for now. This is the longest job I've ever had. Now I'm going on 6 years with working both with first with Bold Radius and now with Lightbend, working with companies to get them into a change mode so that they can adopt new technologies like the Lightbend Reactive Platform. And over that time, what I've found is that we can sort of start to categorize companies in terms of their maturity or their ability to adopt new technology and to change into about 5 major categories. And this isn't just me making this up. There's a number of analysts, things that we've brought together in terms of research to try to help to guide this. But these are sort of the 5 stages, going from traditional to aware to expanding to standardizing to digital business. And we're going to focus on the middle 3, and we're going to talk through those primarily because actually those are a little bit more difficult to sort of differentiate between, and they matter a little more because most companies live in the middle. To quickly touch on the outer sides, so traditional business to us is a company that is not actually interested in change right now. And that might be fine. They might be in an industry that is not going to be disrupted. I can't think of one, but I'm sure they exist. They're probably out there. They're perfectly fine in traditional business, and they have no need to adopt new tech and get onto this new revolution and get on the train. So we won't focus a lot on those. When you talk to them, you can probably figure out that they're not interested in adopting technology. The digital business ones are the ones you know, right? So they're the ones that for us already run on Lightbend Technology. So like Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and Google, and these kinds of companies that are already constantly disrupting themselves, right? They're companies that don't need to, or they've got it embedded into their culture that everything is always changing and always growing. And so they're not, we're not going to focus on them either because, again, probably pretty easy to identify what they are. It is possible that some of these digital businesses, they sometimes do drop down a maturity level. And so you'll see companies that have been built up with a disruptive culture and then for whatever reason fall into a mode where they're afraid to disrupt themselves and things like that. And that does happen. But typically, you can probably identify those guys pretty easy. Coffee's ready? Maybe? No? Okay. Okay. So let's walk through. I like case studies. I think that they're pretty indicative of they paint a better story than me telling you just what these things are. So the first one here is an aware company. So a company that's aware how I look at that kind of company is a company that knows they need to change and has no idea how to do it yet. They're not at a point where disruption is built into their DNA. It's just they just don't know how to proceed forward. So typically, what we've seen them do in this kind of stage is they take some smart person. Maybe it's somebody who's just come in from outside. Maybe often it's a young go-getter inside the organization. Often that person is called an architect. It just ends up that way. Sometimes different, but often it's that. And they give them a bunch of money, right? And usually it's like, hey, this guy knows exactly what he's doing with this stuff. He's going to redefine this whole company. He's going to change everything. Here's a bunch of money. Go do it. And it's a really interesting thing because we've seen aware companies where that person was empowered with $1 billion and was still in this sort of early aware stage. So this company that we were working with, the health company, they were getting hammered by disruptors, right? Apps were coming up that were just stealing all of their market share. And sort of a company that was a Fortune, I think, 50 company at one point, was just getting hammered with free apps that were just stealing their market share. And so they said, okay, something's got to happen. And so they gave a guy a bunch of money and said, go fix this. And what was really interesting about that environment was that this guy's super bright, knew what he was doing, brought in all the right technology, and actually we worked with him because it was all Lightbend technology, and at Bull Radius, and we sent him people to work on the project, and they paid for all kinds of consultants to come in and all this stuff to build this thing, and I think we put something together. We had something production ready day one, kind of by lunchtime first day. That's how powerful this team was. We had something production ready for the first day. It was pretty minimal, but it was there. And then we tried to put that into production, and the very standardized corporate ops team said, "Oh, hey guys, it's going to take us about 6 to 8 months to get the first release environment set up, and then after that we can get onto a year-long release cycle." We're like, okay, we don't know what to do now. So it's a really, that's indicative of these kinds of aware companies. There's a little outpost, there's a little thing, but it's definitely outside of the corporate sort of mandate to go off and make change. And it's often prevented from succeeding because the company's not actually committed to change. They're not actually committed to moving forward. It's like, here's much money, go off and do a thing, right? That's what an aware company typically looks like. So single stakeholder, highly siloed split, really outside of sort of the core mandate of the company. When you get into the expanding company, we're working with a hospitality company right now that's in expanding. And this is the point at which you've got actually a corporate mandate. The CEO, CFO, CTO are aligned on the fact that change and transformation has to happen. We have to build something here that's going to go forward. And that's driving a lot of political capital within the environment. They haven't succeeded yet, right? They haven't got anything in production. They haven't really built anything yet. They're heading towards it. But typically you've got 2-3 projects. You've got people who are, powerful within the organization, managers who are, long-standing managers, have had a lot of success and things like that are driving these initiatives. And, there's a certain amount of coordination happening there. There's a real thing here. Now, usually in an expanding company, they maybe have one project that's sort of going well and everything else is sort of still baby steps, but at least there's a mandate behind it. It's not just somebody with a bunch of money, right? And the last one in standardizing, these are organizations, we're working with a retail bank. This retail bank that we were working with actually had the CEO at one point say, we don't want to be a bank anymore, we're going to be a software company. How many people have heard that before? Yeah, there's a lot of that, I think, in the banking industry right now. So these guys went out and they started with expanding. They built up a bunch of projects that were, successful, started coordinating between them, started heading towards transformation, and they're really getting there. Across the board, internal disruption and building on the success of those projects is driving change within the organization. So they're heading towards being a software company and not just a bank. They're starting to look more like, PayPal than they are like what they were before. And so it's sort of a much different sort of way of operating. So the model that we built out based on this, and you guys don't have to dive into all the pieces, I've highlighted sort of the key thing to identify for each of these phases or stages of maturity in the slide. But the model we built out is to try to place companies within these different things. From my perspective, this matters because the type of success and the type of service and the type of value that we as Lightbend provide to those companies is based on their level of maturity, right? We're not going to take a company that's sitting in the aware stage and say, okay, tomorrow we're going to turn you guys into a software company. Like, just they're not going to care. They're not even there. They're nowhere near that. So in aware, one of the key ways you can tell that a company is in aware is that you've got sort of a key contributor, an individual that is driving that kind of change, right? So there's one person, you talk to that person, they're all about, oh, we're going to change the world and this is how we're going to do it and it's my project and it's going to be amazing. And everybody else within the organization is kind of like, yeah, that wingnut over there, I don't know what he's doing, but it sounds cool and we give him a bunch of money, right? So that's sort of a key differentiator or a key way of identifying an aware company. In expanding, the biggest thing you're going to see is that these guys need to grow talent, right? So they've got a mandate, they want to move forward, but typically it's sort of like, okay, we've got 3 projects started, there's sort of 1 to 2 people in each of those projects who actually knows what they're doing. Everybody else is sort of like, these are cool, I want to be part of it, but I don't know anything about this new technology or this new way of operating or anything about it. And so what they're hungry for is like, we need a way to gain talent that is repeatable, that grows our own talent, so that we're not bringing high-priced consultants and we're not only hiring the most senior people in the world in order to be part of these companies, or these projects rather. And so expanding, you'll hear a lot of that kind of like, how do we grow talent? How do we grow talent? How do we create talent within our organization? In standardizing, what you see a lot more of is, how do we show off what we're doing, right? In standardizing, a lot of these organizations like, hey, we're becoming a software company or we've got some success. Often those kinds of companies are the ones that are driving people out to speak at conferences. They're the ones who are publishing a lot of blog posts on new technology and change and all these kinds of things. What they're looking for is organizational empowerment. They're looking for a way to differentiate what they're doing, attract new talent in, and be sort of thought leaders and community participants. Typically, if you're in expanding, you don't have time to go and speak at a conference. You're like running around trying to actually get this thing done because you've got such a limited talent pool and you've got deliverables and deadlines and all these kinds of things. In standardizing, things are a little more calm. You're at a point where you can actually contribute back to the community and sort of grow within that. So if you see a company that's got a good presence at a technical conference, especially advanced technical conferences, like I always talk about Scala days because it's ours, but those kinds of conferences, people are speaking at that. Typically not the companies that are over to the left. It's more the companies to the right that are going to be speaking there. And then digital businesses, disrupt, all these kinds of things. Maybe we won't focus too much on those. Are there any questions on this? Like, this is sort of, I'm going to talk through why this sort of matters and what to do with all of this in a sec, but just in terms of the model, are there any questions that I can answer right now? Yeah.
Is this like a funnel for you guys? You try to move them along to the digital business stage?
No, not really. A lot of companies will live in one of these stages and never move out of it, and that's okay. You can be a really well-managed and run company and make a lot of success sitting in aware. That's perfectly fine, and a lot of companies do. For us, it's about the type of support that we can offer and the kinds of success that we can expect from companies, right? So Lightbend, just a little back to Lightbend quickly. Lightbend is an open source product company. That means we have the unenviable task of trying to charge people money for something that's free, right? So it's a difficult thing to do. And so what we actually sell is success with our open source products, right? That's sort of the core value proposition. If you want to be successful as an organization with our open source stuff, we can help you to do that. But what success actually means and what that promise can actually be is very much based on this, right? So like, where we can take you from point A to point B, really depends on your point A, right? Does that help the question? Yeah. Any other questions about this? No?
How do you quantify the success here?
How do you quantify the success? I mean, it's always going to be the company's description of success that matters, right? And so success is a pretty ethereal term, as you say. But we'll look at a bunch of different things, and it really depends on the stage. So if you look at, I've got primary need and risks down here as well, right? So in aware, typically we'll quantify success as success of a project, of that core project. Did it go to production? Did it meet the business KPIs that they were trying to drive for that particular project? And if it did, then that's probably considered a success. In expanding, we'll look a little more globally. Are they able to create a talent pipeline, right, that enables them to continually create and grow talent within their organization? How successful are the individual projects, but also how do those projects communicate between themselves in terms of, again, talent and skill set growth and stuff like that. So it really depends on where they are in here that helps us to define what success means. Okay? Yeah.
On the case one, what is the reason that the company cannot move forward by using the DevOps? Why do they have to rely on the production and operations?
Why, like my case study, you mean?
One, the key contributor that
Oh,
the problem with
sorry.
moving to production.
You mean,
because of that.
like this one, the health company? So a lot of the reason that aware companies are where they are in terms of maturity is because of their existing sort of momentum, right? I've got a colleague, and I'll just sort of try to reason by analogy a little bit here, but I've got a colleague who joined Bold Radius very early on, and he was a Java developer, and we converted him into being like this rabid Scala developer, right? Not that we love Java and Scala, but at the time we loved Scala more. So we took him from being a Java developer and put him into being a Scala developer, and he became sort of like, this was his new religion, right? It was like, it was big for him. And he would come in and talk to our clients, and he would say, look, okay, I get that this is scary, okay? Java paid for my house too, right? But Scala's better, and I'll show you why, right? And so this was sort of his way of saying that. Change is hard, right? Change is difficult because in order to change, you have to let go of what's already working. And for this health company and a lot of the companies in Aware, they know what works, right? So if I go to a company, especially in the Aware stage, and in our technology parlance, we've got something called Akka cluster, right? An Akka cluster is a widely distributed system, software system that is highly resilient, just fundamentally in how it works. And if I go to a company like that and I say, hey guys, throw out all your load balancers when it comes to Akka cluster. You don't need those anymore, right? They look at me like I've got two heads because this is how they know how to build resilient software, right? Taking out the load balancer and allowing the Akka system, the cluster, regardless of how much they know about it, that's just not part of policy. It's not part of how they work. It's scary, right? And that's part of the culture of the organization. And so if you've got an organization that believes that if you take less than 6 months in a release cycle, that you are not properly reviewing what you're putting into production and going through the proper processes, and that's sort of fundamental to the culture, it's very difficult to tell them that you should have a CI/CD pipeline that allows you to release 15 times a day, right? Like moving that rock up the hill is really, really difficult. And so that's really why we run into these kinds of problems with aware and early stage companies, is because no matter what you do in terms of intelligent technical stuff, you have to fight the culture in order to get the stuff in there. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, just another question on top of that, following that one.
Yeah.
Is it also a case that, I guess, companies have to get used to more risk in whatever they deploy, in that it might not work 100% of the time, and like, I guess, adopting that mindset to getting used to the things that, like, yeah, we might have more faults than what we used to, or, is that part of it? Because I think the quicker you roll out something, the quicker you deploy something, chances are it's going to have more holes, you're going to find more gaps.
I don't think so. I actually don't really agree with the line of reasoning because, so it's which risks you want to sort of, which risks you're comfortable with, right? Every risk has a corresponding anti-risk, I guess. I don't know. There's an amazing book, it's just an aside, it's called Risk. It's by Dan Gardner, who's an Ottawa-based journalist. Amazing book. Pick it up, read it. It's about perceived risk versus actual risk. But your risk in a sort of major enterprise, slow release cycle is likely, and the opinion that I have, because I've seen this a lot, it's actually probably higher than if you have a really well-developed, highly tested system for continuous deployment, regardless of how fast you're deploying. And so if you're building a system that has huge suites of automated tests because you've got a test-driven mentality within your culture, and you've got a DevOps system that ensures that your deployments are automated and tested as well, your 6-month deployment with manual releases and no tests is actually probably riskier than your 15 releases a day, right? The fact that you have processes and procedures you follow doesn't actually decrease your risk unless, those are addressing the real risks that are there, I guess is the fundamental. And I think you can go wrong either way, but I don't think it has anything to do with your release cycle time. Any other questions? No? Okay, I'll keep moving. So job seekers. So I'm going to talk about job seekers. I'm going to talk about change agents. I'm going to talk about job seekers first. This is, so I'm now living in California. If you ever go to San Francisco, especially if you have kids, but if you ever go to San Francisco, go to a place called the Exploratorium. The Exploratorium is just this amazing place. I'll let you guys look it up yourself. But there's a book there that I saw, and it's this Mini Weapons of Mass Destruction, it's called. And it's got this sort of, it's all these kinds of diagrams where they're building elastic band shooters and stuff like that. It's really cool. That's where I stole this from. Anyway, so the reason I put that up there is that, my advice, my premise here is that as a job seeker, you should be a sharpshooter, right? The sort of idea of spray and pray, I'm going to send my resume out to just about everybody who, might have a posting, is I don't think it's going to serve anybody in good stead, right? So, focusing your efforts is critical. And focusing your efforts on companies using the model that I just gave you, as well as, where your interests lie and things like that, is really important. And I think what a lot of job seekers and having done a lot of hiring over the last decade, what I've found is that a lot of people, go very surface with their job seeking efforts, right? So they start out and they just say, that looks like a neat company, I'll apply, right? But what you'll find is that if you get onto like LinkedIn and you start connecting with people and you start talking to people about what they're doing, you can establish a relationship very early on that helps you to identify the most amazing company that you could possibly work for, or helps you to set yourself up for getting into a position that you really want to be in, with building up a network and things like that. So I'm a little biased because I've been in sales for a long time these days, over the last little while, but job seeking is a sales job, right? It's a job of building relationships so that when it comes time for somebody to open up a position, you're the logical choice. You're the only choice because you're the one who's been there, speaking to them, working through this with them, and helping them to see the value of bringing you on board. So, given that approach, I've sort of set up a couple of questions that if I was doing this, if I was out looking for a position right now in a field like this, that I would ask to people within these sort of fields. And the one question that I wouldn't ask when I'm meeting somebody for the first time or second time or even third time within one of these companies that I connected over LinkedIn is, can I get a job, right? That's the question I wouldn't ask, right? It's always a good watchword, if you want to be interesting, be interested, right? Rather than always asking for what you want right out of the gate. So understanding the company on the maturity model, I think, is important as a first step. And the reason that that's important is because what your goals are should align with the kind of company that you're going into. So if you're the kind of person, like not kind of person, if you're interested in one of what will, probably has been or will be many careers that you have throughout your working life, if you're interested in joining a company where you're going to make a huge impact, right, where you're going to be able to be that change agent that helps that company to transform and grow, and that you're willing to fight the organization towards change so that you can have that kind of heavy impact, look for a company that's less mature, right? Go out and find one that's in the aware stage that, that you can be that person that they're going to give that bucket of money to and go out and try to make change, right? It's hard, it's a push, but the impact that you potentially have there is massive, right? On the other hand, if you're looking to grow, learn from smart people who are, already there and making this change and, have achieved a level of success, you want to go to the other side. You want to try to go up the chain in terms of maturity model a little bit more, right? And try to find organizations that have a base of talent that you can learn from and grow with and, continually learn on. Some of the questions that I would ask if I was going to go in and wanted to ensure that, my objectives of continually learning, continually growing was aligned with the company are like, how does training people directly affect the bottom line of this company, right? Not, do you support training your people? Because everybody wants to train their people. But when it comes down to we've got a hard, bad quarter and we've got to cut back, is training the first thing that they cut back? Does it really matter structurally to the success of the company to train their people, grow their people, and mentor? And on the other side, when they have a great quarter and it's really busy and there's tons of opportunity, does training fall by the wayside? Is that the thing that everybody drops out? Or is it fundamental to the organization to remain on the forefront of technology and therefore continually grow their people towards that? That's the kind of company you want to try to get to, and you want to see how training their people and growing their people directly affects the bottom line, not indirectly, not as a nice thing to do, right? How interested is the company in trying new things, right? What are some of the things that they've built up internally that have been successful in terms of change and transformation? Not that they've bought, right? Not acquisitions, but things that they've built up internally. And then finally, how successful have their acquisitions of innovative teams been? Have they retained those people? Have they managed to take innovation in and continue it and continue to grow it? So these are, I think, really interesting things to ask an organization that you're looking to eventually be part of, and go in and be interested about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to, trying to be successful within the market. And then the last thing is, if you're looking at a single group that is responsible for change, think about how empowered that organization is to make change, right? And so I've got this classic example of enterprise architects. I love enterprise architects. I think they're great. Very, very smart people in enterprise architecture in a lot of cases. But there's different ways to structure these groups. And if you look at an enterprise architecture group that is, part of the product team, they've got direct responsibility, they've got budget for people, those ones are the ones that are really empowered. If you've got an enterprise architecture group, often, and this isn't always the case by any means, but if you've got an enterprise architecture group that is kind of off to the side and is making recommendations, oftentimes what you'll find is that the development manager who's got a deadline and a big budget and a huge team is going to be like, okay, that's really cool, what you guys are doing over there, but I've got to just get this done right now. And so think about how the group you're talking to is empowered within the organization, what kind of budget that they have, and what kind of pressures that they have in order to achieve success. Change agents. So if you're already inside an organization, right, how do you become the agent of change in order to help companies to progress and head towards this transformation, take advantage of all of the data and everything that's coming into this fourth software revolution? The most important thing in terms of making change, bar none, is that you need to build the right to give advice, right? And I've got a little analogy that I like to give on this, and it's my bricklayer analogy. And if there's any bricklayers in the room, I'm really sorry because I've never laid bricks. I'm just making this up from scratch. So if you've got a team of bricklayers, and I don't know what a team of bricklayers is called, but if you've got a team of bricklayers, and you've got, you're the bricklayer who's like kind of the bottom of the barrel. Like you sort of like, you're really slow and you're sloppy and your bricks fall over a lot. If you're that person and you come up to the head of the bricklaying team, I guess that's like a foreman or something. So if you go and talk to that person, you're like, hey, I found this machine. It's really cool. It'll make me go 3 times faster and it'll clean up my work. Chances are that that person's going to be like, yeah, that's cool, but if you suck at this, and you need the crutch, right? And they're not going to take you really all that seriously, right? You don't get that right to give that advice or to make that kind of change. Whereas if you're the best bricklayer on the team, you're like twice as fast as everybody else, and you like, really clean with your work, and you bring that same machine to your boss, and you say, this is going to make me 3 times faster, chances are that you're going to get a lot of response. Oh my gosh, my best person, twice as fast, could be 3 times more, right? Could be 6 times as fast as everybody else. A lot of response, a lot of interest in that. So you have to earn the right to give advice. Change is all about, people. It's all about, driving this kind of transformation and driving changes to people's minds. And unless you're standing on a platform of success, it's very difficult to actually affect change and make change. So, and I see this a lot, it's my own personal failing as well. I come in and I see a problem, I'm like, I want to fix that. You have to be successful in the current context before you have the opportunity to make change, right? That's really, really important as an agent of change. Second thing is show, don't tell, right? If you've got something you're going to, you want to, go forward with something, it takes the investment of time, the investment of effort to build something that you can show to people and say, this is the result that we could be driving together, right? Showing and not telling, very, very powerful at the end of the day. And in the aware stage, that's what you see a lot. These people who have been empowered as agents of change often are bringing forward a solution that they've built up on their own time, or that they've built up somewhere else, or whatever, that they can show and say, this is where we could go. Some MVP, some minimal viable product. Third thing is you have to understand the business. So change for change's sake, or just hey, the industry's going this way, we should go there too, are not really strong arguments, right? So understanding what keeps your CEO up at night, what gets him up in the morning, excited, scared, those things are the things that you're going to be able to drive change on. So if you can tie a change initiative to what the company is actually primarily concerned with, you're going to be much more successful. And understanding the business at that level, right, really down to what are the 3 things that your CEO thinks about every day, and how can you affect those 3 things with a change initiative, is the only way that you can really drive substantive change within an organization, right? You can't just sort of make it up. So looking back at our stages, right, what are the kinds of changes that are feasible within those stages, right? So in the aware stage, you can the kinds of change that you can really drive is you can show off a new solution. You can gain some acceptance for that. You can achieve some initial successes, and the biggest thing is you can gain some allies, right? So if you're the voice in the wilderness, gaining some allies and some people who are also committed to that change in an aware stage, that is really, really important to drive that kind of change. In the expanding stage, looking for opportunities. So in the aware stage, it's really about you, right? It's like, succeed at this one thing at the expense of all else. In the expand stage, it's all about other people, right? How do I bring people into the expanding change that we have going on within the organization? Within this group that we're building new technology in, how do I bring more of the community into that, train people up, and find the opportunities to empower others, right? Nurture success, share best practices, and share the excitement of the change that's happening within the organization. In standardizing, it's about creating communities, creating standards, and getting outside the organization in order to raise the entire profile of the project or the change or the transformation that's going on. Like I said before, change doesn't happen without letting something go. And so, change is hard from that perspective. And so you have to have a lot of momentum to be able to allow people to let go of what's already working, right? Last thing, when you're looking at organizations to join, right, there are, within the maturity model, there are organizations at every stage that are well managed, a joy to work for, have awesome people. The stage doesn't dictate that, right? But there are organizations that you should try to avoid. Not based on the stage, but based on how they operate. And I've got sort of 4 different levels. I think I've got 4 minutes left, so I'll try to do a level per minute of dragons to avoid. First one, companies that have no commitment to change, right? So if you're being told you're going to be a change agent, but there's nothing behind that, beware, right? There's the old story of the engineer that's told, well, you're going to go and build a new technology team in an emerging market all by yourself with no budget. Huge opportunity, right? And it's just being set up for failure. So watch for things that have a lot of interesting words and like, hey, we're gonna change, we're gonna grow, but there's no actual fundamental commitment to that. There's no budget behind it, there's no people behind it, and everything like that. That's a huge warning sign. Always ask the questions. If you're gonna drive or you're gonna lead change, how much support do you have within the organization? And don't let your own enthusiasm for creating a solution or pushing forward a solution, eclipse your ability to drive, to actually have the success you need behind it. Change too late, right? So if you're co-pilot on a plane and the pilot gets the plane into a spin and you're 10 feet off the ground and he's like, okay, you take over. You're not going to be able to pull that plane out of a spin before you hit the ground, no matter how good you are, right? So when you get to a point where a company is changing too late, right? They've lost all their best people. They don't have the funding in order to actually fund change. And they're like, oh no, let's fix this. Be cautious. And that's a tough thing to figure out. It's really hard to sort of look at a company and be like, especially from the outside, and be like, these guys are trying to change way too late. But it does happen. And often we sort of realize that we're down the path too late in order to actually make change. Try not to join organizations at that point in time. Not easy, but try. Third one is what I call the revenue downward spiral. So I've worked for companies that have been in the revenue downward spiral. It happens in startups a lot, actually. Revenue downward spiral, what this basically means is, and I'll give you the example of the company I worked for. I worked for a company, I was a lead developer. I had a CEO who was this amazing, charismatic sales guy. Awesome guy. He went out and he would talk to a company and he'd say, yes, we can do exactly what you're looking for. We can build what you're looking for. That's part of our product, no problem. And then he'd come back to us and be like, hey guys, I just sold this thing, you guys better build it, right? And so we went off and we're like, okay, great, build it as fast as we can. And a week later, he would go talk to another company and be like, we can do that, no problem, it's part of our product. And he'd come back and be like, hey guys, I just sold this, you gotta build it. And we'd say, well, we're still working on the thing from last week. And he'd say, no, ignore that, forget that, drop that, this is bigger, this is more important, go do this thing, right? And so what was happening is that you would get revenue, what we call bad revenue, or revenue we couldn't deliver on, after bad revenue, after bad revenue, after bad revenue. And I think about 75% of the code we wrote there was just thrown away because we just never got to end a job on stuff. But what it becomes is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's why I call it a downward spiral, because eventually you can't do anything else. You still need to bring revenue into the business. You have to fund all of the previous promises you've got, sort of like a promise Ponzi scheme a little bit, right? So you have to keep funding that stuff. And so be very aware of companies that are led that way, where they don't have sort of commitment to continue and stick to sort of their fundamentals. When they're driving sort of change and transformation, they're not sticking to and committing to the change for long enough to see it through, right? I mean, spinning, essentially. And related to that, sort of the last thing is cargo cult. So does anybody know what a cargo cult is? No? You heard of this before? Okay, quick divergence. Cargo cult. So in World War II, there were, on the African front, there were airstrips built in the jungle. So they would cut down pieces of the jungle and they would fly these cargo planes in, and they would restock the troops through these landing strips. And there were people who lived there who had never seen airplanes before and all these kinds of things. It was really getting into the thickest jungle. And when the planes would land, it would bring a huge amount of wealth to the people who were around that area. So all these goods would come out, and they'd trade with them, and all these kinds of things. And when the war ended, all this disappeared. And anthropologists went in a couple of years later And they found that the people in those areas had actually rebuilt the landing strips. And so you'd like have these landing strips with control towers and all these kinds of things built out of like trees and bamboo and all kinds of like things like that. And what they found was that the people believed that if they built the landing strips, it would bring the planes back, right? And so this is what we call a cargo cult, or these sort of like idea, and it's funny to us, but if you think about it, if you're in that context and you have no idea why these planes are landing, what's going on, I mean, it's a fairly reasonable thing to try to do. And so, so these cargo cults, in transformational sort of language and looking at this sort of adopting change, is if you have an organization that talks a big game about this stuff and is heading towards some sort of change, but that change is not substantive and it's not actually going to drive change within the organization. What you'll see in software a lot is like, we have to re-architect this system to the new code base. And the question is like, why? Like, it works. Why do you have to re-architect? Why do you have to spend millions upon millions of dollars to rebuild a system that already works and is in place? In a lot of cases, some cases, that's cargo culting. I mean, it's kind of like, it's the new shiny thing that we've got to build against, but we don't have any of the fundamentals. We don't have any reason that we're actually driving new capabilities and technologies out of that kind of a change. So watch out for that as well, because that doesn't often lead to good places. That's it. I hope you guys got some value out of this. I just got this email address, so hopefully it works. I'm mike.kelland@lightbend.com if it doesn't, but k@lightbend.com should work now, because all the cool kids have one-letter email addresses. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to hear from you. I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'm around for another hour now, and then I'll be around tomorrow. But otherwise, thank you very much.